Alright, so welcome back for another video. This is Professor Jason Ellis, and we're going to be talking about the science fiction research essay that you're going to be turning in at the end of the semester. First off, I want to talk just briefly about the scope of the essay, and then we're going to talk about how to do the research that you need to get done for the project. And I talked about this in our last class when we were actually still meeting together, but just want to go over some of the highlights again. That you can find details on the project on our syllabus page. Scroll down, and under grading, you'll see the research essay here. Counts for 20% of your grade in the class. And again, you want to choose a work of science fiction that's not on the syllabus. Okay, this can be a short story, it can be a novel, it could be science fiction poetry, it could be science fiction music, it could be a film, it can be a TV show, it can be a comic book, but whatever it is you choose, make sure that you choose something that's manageable. So for example, if you were to say you're going to write about Star Trek, you'd want to choose at the maximum one of the Star Trek series or one of the Star Trek films. You don't want to have your project be about all of Star Trek because it's too big, too unwieldy for such a small project as what you're going to be working on in our class. So if you wanted to write about Star Trek the original series, great. You want to write about Star Trek the Next Generation, also great. But don't do the original series and the Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, and Enterprise, and Discovery. You see, it's getting way too big, and it's going to be more than you can write about in such a short essay as what you're going to be working on. So choose something manageable. Similarly, if you want to write about Star Wars, choose a film in the series. Choose a television series in the mythos of Star Wars, so like the Clone Wars or Rebels, but don't write about everything having to do with Star Wars. It's too much. Similarly with comic books, if you want to write about Batman, don't choose Batman. Choose a particular story arc or a graphic novel involving Batman. If you want to write about the different Batman films, choose one of the films. Don't write about like a long series of films because it could be too unwieldy, again, for your project. So choose something that's manageable. That's the subject of your essay. That's the primary source, the primary research source that you're going to be using to analyze for the project. And so what are you going to do with that thing? What your objective is to argue that that work that you've selected is an example of science fiction. And you'll do that by both looking at the work itself and teasing out what are the elements of science fiction. But that's assuming we know what science fiction is, right? So the other thing that you have to do is establish what is science fiction. And this is where you can rely in part on those list of definitions that I gave you at the beginning of the semester. And I'll also add a link to our Open Lab site for a PDF, so in case you've lost that, don't have access to it, you'll still be able to take a look at those definitions. But you need to establish, what does science fiction mean? And based on that definition, you can then begin talking about how the source that you've selected, the topic of your essay you've selected, is an example of science fiction. So your essay should have an argument. Say, Star Trek is science fiction because, and you're going to lay out some reasons why it's an example of science fiction. Now, as I noted in our last class, you need to have 6 cited sources. Okay, cited means quoted from. Okay, and one of those is your primary source. That's the science fiction you selected. The book, the short story, the film, the television series, etc. That's your primary source. But then you also need to have 5 outside sources or secondary sources. 2 of those can come from that list of definitions I gave you, because I cited the definition, and I also gave you the Works Cited entry that's going to go at the end of your essay. That's the bibliographic entry for those definitions. But you also are going to need to find at least 3 other outside sources that you'll be able to quote from to support the points that you're trying to make, the argument that you're trying to make about the example, the subject of your essay. Okay? Now, those 3 other sources have to come from the library. They can come from the City Tech Library, they can come from the Newark Public Library, they can come from any library, but they cannot, okay, I cannot stress this enough, they cannot be some rando websites that you found through Google. They can't be from Wikipedia. They need to be something that are vetted resources that are available through the library. But now, just to backtrack a little bit, I encourage you to use rando web searches to learn a little bit more about the subject you selected for your essay. You can use Wikipedia to learn more and also to find sources that you might be able to in turn source through the library as secondary sources to support your argument. So those things aren't bad in the sense that you can't use them. I want you to use them. You can learn a lot from those places. But because we don't always know who's written something on a rando website, we certainly don't know who wrote what on a Wikipedia page because it's a community that writes it, and the information there has been sourced from other places. So as an aggregator of information, we don't need to rely on that. We want to go back to where that information is sourced. And that's often sources that we can find through the library, places that are vetted sources of information. And then finally, make sure you're aware of the word count. It needs to be at least 2,500 words. That's all inclusive, everything from the start to the finish of your essay, including all the quotes and the works cited list at the end. 2,500 words. It can be more than that. I will read anything more than that and grade it accordingly, but it can't be less than if you expect to receive at least full credit on the assignment. 2,500 words is essentially 10 pages double-spaced, if we figure 250 words per double-spaced page. And then when we get closer to the end of the semester, I'll explain how to turn that in on OpenLab. Basically, you're going to be creating a post, just like I create posts for you all, as assignments, announcements, etc. You'll make your own post, and you'll categorize it as a student research essay, and that's the way it'll get turned in, and I'll then read it and then be able to grade it for your final grade. And of course, if you have questions about like the parameters of the assignment, questions about like what you should choose, reach out to me by email. I've already asked everyone to email me if you haven't spoken to me in person about what you've selected, because I can give you some ideas. I can help you whittle down to something that's manageable for the project. And it also lets me know that you've got a good topic and that you're working on it now. So reach out to me if you haven't done so already with your ideas. All right, so let's get into the actual project itself, how to do the research. So first off, make sure you put this in your notebooks. The first thing you should do as a researcher is keep a research log. A log book or a log is basically just something like, a notebook, a notepad, where you're keeping all of your research in one place. Though I would recommend, instead of using a notepad, like I have my notes written down for today's lecture, use a computer, use a tablet, use your phone, start a new text document, create a new Word docx file, create a new Google Doc. And in one place, record all the notes that you have, both about the subject that you're researching, like say, you've selected Star Trek as the topic of your research essay. You will want to keep your notes there about your own observations, your own thoughts about it, but then you'll also want to include a list of keywords that you generate. Keywords are those words that you're going to search for whenever you're using the library. And the keyword list that you create is going to expand over time. Right now, at the beginning, you may only have a few words, like, say, the topic Star Trek. You might have picked up some terms from our lectures so far, so you might include, like, space opera. You might include terms like who created it, like Gene Roddenberry. But those would go into that keywords list so that you can use them and remember them whenever you do searches on the library's website and the different databases that you have access to. Also in the research log, you'll want to write down all the bibliographic information about your primary and secondary sources. The bibliographic information that you need is going to, we can find lists of what that information is from the Purdue OWL MLA website, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. But essentially, who's the author? What's the title? Where was it published? When was it published? Is there a volume and issue number for a periodical? Was it, if you're talking about your primary sources, like you may need to know, like the production company, who was the distributor, who was the director, etc. All that kind of information that helps you tell someone else where you found this particular source. That's the bibliographic information. Any quotes that you find that you think might be useful, and more likely you're going to find more quotes than you can actually fit into your essay. And I think that's a good thing, because it's better to have more than not to have enough and then have to go looking some more. So any quotes that you think are interesting that you would like to discuss, that provide some support to the conclusions that you're drawing about how the topic of your essay is a work of science fiction, or that help elaborate or expand your discussion about how that thing that you selected as an example of science fiction, you'll want to include in your research log. Make sure you put quotes around it, and after each thing you quote, in parentheses, always include what we call the parenthetical citation, which is going to usually include the author's last name and the page number that that quote comes from. So make sure you're always documenting that so there's never any confusion about anything that you quote, because you obviously want to use quotes. You want to cite those things properly so that your reader knows where that information has come from, so they can distinguish what you're writing from what someone else has written, right? That's giving proper credit where credit's due, and which is like the main thing about proper citations and avoiding plagiarism. Because I want you to quote things. I want you to use the ideas of others in your essay, but you got to be able to distinguish what's your ideas and your writing from the writing of others. And along those lines, I don't want to see any paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is where you take what someone else has written and then you and their ideas, and you rewrite it into your own words. You still have to cite those things, but the problem I often find with students, particularly at this stage, you might make a mistake where you're paraphrasing. Because some folks like to think of paraphrasing as like, oh, okay, I'll take this sentence, I'll use a few different adjectives and adverbs, maybe change a verb to something that's still appropriate, and I've paraphrased it, and that's wrong. Paraphrasing is completely taking the ideas of someone else and putting that work away so you can't even see their writing, and then re-articulating it in a truthful, an accurate way, but totally using your own words to do so. And real paraphrasing is hard to do. Part of the work that you're doing in our class of summarizing lectures, summarizing readings, after every week's worth of class, that work is really intended to help you develop your paraphrasing skills, to be able to summarize and re-articulate things using your own words. But for our research essay, I don't want you to do any paraphrasing. I want to see quotes, and I want to see quotes introduced using your own words and then explained using your own words. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. As I mentioned before, it's perfectly fine to use Google, to use Wikipedia, to use YouTube even, to find people talking and writing about the thing that you've selected for your project, to learn a little bit about it. But those are not going to be sources that you may cite counting towards the 6 required sources. But now, I should append that to say you can have more than the 6 cited sources. Okay, they still need to be cited, they still need to be quoted. But anything that you find beyond your library sources, beyond your primary source that you're working on for your essay, you can use these other sources as well. Just make sure that you're citing them. And remember, they don't count toward the required 6. The one that's the primary source that you're writing your project on, and then your 5 secondary or outside sources that you're using to support your argument. So let's take a look at how you can do research, particularly since the library is closed. All the libraries are closed around town. We're going to have to use the online resources that we have available to us. So to always start your research, just remember the simple URL, library.citytech.cuny.edu. library.citytech.cuny.edu. That'll take you to the City Tech Library's website. You can see at the top they have this announcement that they're closed until further notice because of New York pause, and obviously to protect all the library staff and students. But notice here, we are still available to support the City Tech community, they say. If I click on that, this is a post by librarian Nora Almeida, where you can see that they give links to resources and services that are still available to use. And in particular, I want to draw your attention here to Ask a Librarian. You can still use the Ask a Librarian feature where you click this link to get in touch with the library if you have any research questions. That's part of their job, is if you're having trouble finding some things or finding something useful to your project, you can get in touch with them, describe to them about the essay that you're working on in our class. You describe to them a little bit about what you've already found, what your ideas are, and then you make the ask. You say, well, I've found these things. Can you help me find something more that would be useful? And maybe give them some ideas of what you're trying to find but have been unable to do so. That's the librarian's job. They can help you with that. So don't forget that as a very important resource that you have electronically, that you don't necessarily have to talk to someone in person, that you can do it electronically there. So going back to library.citytech.cuny.edu, let's take a look at some of the places to do your research. And a large part of this is going to come through articles. And articles are contained in journals, and those journals are in turn contained in databases. And what we're going to be looking at is some of those databases. So if you'll scroll down a little bit, over here on the left, you'll see Start Your Research. Let's click on Find Articles. Now, under Find Articles, we can browse by name if we know what the database is we want to search, or you can also do Find by Subject, which will list out databases that are relevant to a particular subject. If you want to go the route of looking in databases by subject, this link here for humanities, communications, literature, music, and more, that's the link that you'll want to go to. Just click on humanities, and then you're going to get a whole list of different databases that you can use. And they have a title, and then they have a little description underneath. So like Academic OneFile by Gale, Academic Search Complete by EBSCO. All these things listed here may be useful for your searches. And the keyword list that you're going to keep in your research log, those are the keywords you're going to plug into these databases to see what comes up. And as you read a little bit, as you learn a little bit, you can add more things to your keyword list in your research log and draw on those things. So don't think just the first 3 words that come to mind are only words you should be looking for. You need to continually revise your keyword list and use different combinations from the keyword list to find things that are more relevant to your research. And part of this is hard work, but this kind of work is work that you get better at by doing. And again, there's no like simple shortcuts or some sort of methodical process I can teach you. A large part of this comes from simply doing it and learning how the process works by doing it, okay? So this is something you have to devote some time to. It's not something I can say like, okay, you use the databases for 15 minutes and you're done. You're going to find everything you need. That's not the way this works. As before, like I talked at the very beginning of our class, the class has an expectation of 3 credit hours per week, right? That means that you spend 3 hours in class, but you should be spending twice that amount of time outside of class. And sometimes you don't need to spend that much, but over time, if we average it out, you'll be spending 6 hours a week outside of class just on work for our class. It includes readings, includes your note-taking, and it also includes the research that you have to do for this research essay. So you're going to have to spend some time where you actually sit down for extended amounts of time doing the research with the databases. So let's take a look at some of these databases that I would recommend you use. So I'm going to look at the top of this, and you see where find articles and more, browse by name. Let's just jump right to the names I want to tell you about. The first is going to be Jstor. So I'm going to click on J. You can see here there's the Journal of the American Medical Association. We're not going to use it. We're going to use Jstor. I'm going to click on that. Now, normally when you click on Jstor from home, it's going to ask you to log in. What you have to do is type in your library card number at the bottom of your CityTech ID. And it's going to be a long number. And after you've typed it in, no spaces, click Next. It'll load up the database that you want to access. So make sure that you remember to have your CityTech ID handy. And remember, it's not just your impl ID. There's like an extra set of numbers at the beginning of it. I believe it begins 224. Then your impl ID. You put all that together, and that's the number that you put in. That's what authenticates you to the resource, because they don't want everybody to have access to these things, because it costs a tremendous amount of money for us to provide access to these databases. You wouldn't be able to buy this access on your own unless you're like someone like Bill Gates. I certainly couldn't afford this on my own. I have to always access these things through the educational institution I work for. So this one is Jstor. Jstor is a really good database for humanities-based journals. And based on some of the topics that I've talked about with students in class, I want to use some of those terms to do our searches. So let's start off with one, because like one of the students in the class is an architecture major. And so one of the particular architecture design teams that does some science fictional work that she's interested in, let's see what we can find related to that. And that's called Archigram. So I'm just going to type in the name of that particular group, Archigram. Now you can see I brought up 577 search results. Over here on the left, you can see that 524 of them are journal articles, 53 of them are book chapters, and that's the neat thing about Jstor is that we also have access to eBooks. So you don't even have to have like a physical book. You can find books through the databases as well. And you can check one of these to limit your search just to that. So I can just put a check next to book chapters. Takes a second, and now all of my results are chapters from eBooks that I have access to. Those would make really great sources for your research essay. The same way, I can switch that to the journal articles. Again, all of these are vetted sources that you can use for your research essay, for those extra sources, those secondary sources that you need to quote from for evidence, and also to support the discussion you're making about how Archigram, for example, is science fictional. Now, I might want to see what I can pull up that might even be related to science fiction. So I have Archigram, so now I'm going to add science fiction. So now my search results have gone from like 500 down to 96. That means I don't have to look through as many things that might have relevance to what I want to write my research essay about. But the thing is, the way Jstor works is each of these terms are looked for as individual things. It sees the term archigram, it sees the term science, and it sees the term fiction. What happens if I put some quotes around science fiction so it looks at science fiction as one thing rather than as separate things? Didn't help me that much, but it did take it from 96 search results down to 73. So again, it's a little bit less stuff that I need to look at. If I want to, I can check over here next to journals, and that's going to take it even further down to just 61 articles from journals. Now let's see, in my notes here, architecture and communication is one of the things maybe I want to take a look at. So you can see this article here, journal article called Architecture and Communication. It's by Spela Hudnik. I can see the journal title, Urbani Iziv. I can see it's volume 14, number 2. It's a special issue on the image of city and popular culture. I can see the date that it was published on, December 2003, and I also see the page numbers. This information I'm highlighting right now, this is the bibliographic information you need to get on all those sources that you might be finding in the databases. Title of the article, the author's name, the title of the journal, volume number, issue number. If it has a special title for that issue, grab that. It's not always true. Get the date it was published, in this case December 2003, and then most importantly get the page numbers that the article appears on. So now I found this article, I want to read it now. I want to see what's going on in it. I'm going to click on download PDF over here on the right to grab it. It's going to ask you to agree to the terms and conditions. I'm going to accept. Alright, so now the PDF is opened up. If I want to, and I would recommend you do this, especially if you're working at your own computer, is download this PDF. You'll want to save these things. Don't rely on having to find them again later, because that can be a pain in the ass and you can really kick yourself if you have trouble finding a source that you found earlier but lost. So click the download button in your browser, save this guy. Now what I'm going to do is, I see there's a lot of words, it's like a whole lot of words. Do I really want to read this whole thing? Well, one of the things I'll look for first is like if it has an abstract. In this case, it doesn't. So what I would do is just read the introduction before I did anything else. That way I can make a decision, do I want to read the rest of this to help with my research, or does it sound like this isn't having anything to do with what I'm working on? If it doesn't, put this aside and go back to your searches to find things. Another way to help you evaluate if there might be something relevant to your search, to your research, is to search the document for some of your keywords. So like I can just type in science fiction to see where that term might come up and read those sentences. So here science fiction came up, so I can read that sentence. New technologies evolving from completed projects by NASA, development of the media, science fiction and pop culture influenced the emergence of futuristic fashion, design, art, music, city planning, and urban regeneration. That sentence might actually be something I might want to quote and use maybe as a part of my introduction in my essay to describe what things I'm talking about with science fictional architecture. This kind of gives us broad overview of what's taking place and how science fiction is being informed by some of these ideas. I see at the bottom there's 2 matches, so let me find that other one. So at the very end, bodies of population genetics. And it looks like this might actually be a quote, uniting genes, monstrous hybrids, architectural theory, and cybernetic fiction. Footnote 20. See like how it has this number there? So I'm going to look through the notes for that. G-Lin The work is Folds, Bodies, and Blobs. The letter Volet, Brussels, 1998, page 170. That's probably going to be hard for me to source. But occasionally, when you look at the footnotes and the sources that are listed in an article that you find, you might find something that you can then plug back into your searches at the library's website and make use of that source. So again, the journal articles you find can be useful for quotes. They can be useful for teaching you something that you need to know about the subject you've selected, but also look at the notes and the Works Cited list at the end, if it has one, for other sources that you might make use of. All right, so let's take a look at another database. So that was Jstor. I'm going to go back over to my tab with the City Tech Library. And let's take a look at Project Muse. So I'm going to go over to P. Scroll down, and you can see here Project Muse. This is another good one. Just like Jstor, they're for the humanities. They contain articles as well as ebooks. So I'll click Project Muse. Based on discussions with another student, I was talking with them about music and science fiction, and in particular, the music of Sun Ra. So let's type in Sun Ra and see what comes up. So you can see I got 5,992 results. That's like way too many, obviously, for me to try to narrow down. So what I'm going to do is change this search to Sun Ra in quotes so that it's looking exactly for what I want and not those words separately. Now you can see 5,000 something is now reduced to 242 results. That's good. Make that a little bigger, easier to see. Now, if you look over here on the left, I can select content type. I can look at books, which would be like, chapters in the books, or I could also look at articles and reviews. Now, it didn't find any books I have access to, but it did find 137 articles and 38 reviews. Reviews are not the same as a journal article. Articles are where new knowledge is created. Reviews are simply reviewing the work someone else has written. So I'm going to put a check next to articles. So I'm only looking for the good stuff that is going to be like the hardcore type research that we want to be looking at. So I've checked articles, and let's see. Some that I've looked at, why can't we go somewhere there? Okay, so this very first one you can see here, why can't we go somewhere there? Sun Ra, Improvisation and the Imagination of Future Possibilities. You can see it's written by A.J. Hebla. It was published in the Canadian Theatre Review. That's the title of the journal. You can see volume 143. It was published in summer 2010, and it's on pages 98 to 100. All this information I would copy and paste immediately into my research log. That's all the bibliographic information that I need on this article before I go looking for some of those quotes. Now to look at the article, I'm going to click on this download link next to the PDF icon. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to choose to download it. Click on the download link over here on the right. I'm using Firefox. It'll be different for other browsers, but download this PDF, save it on your computer or a flash drive so that you have access to it. All right. Now, I need to find out like where there might be something useful for my work. So I'm going to just do a search inside this document for Sun Ra, see where it comes up. I see it in the title. I see it in the Works Cited. It's in that one caption for this picture. Back up at the top. So it's not coming up in a lot of places. So I'm thinking, maybe something's weird going on with the way that the text works in the essay. And if I scroll up, I can see, you see this author is using Ra as a last name, so not always using the first and last name, so it's only coming up as Ra. Well, I'm going to reduce my search just to Sun and see maybe the first time he mentions Sun Ra in the article. Here we go. So here I'm on, this would be the second page of the article. And I can see he used the full name, Sun Ra, because normally when you're writing and you use someone's name in your writing, the first time you mention their name, you'll use their full name, like Jason Ellis, Isaac Asimov. But then each subsequent time, you should only use their last name, Ellis or Asimov, for example. So in this case, the first time this person writing this article uses the person's name, these models find particularly relevant expression in the life work of the Astro-Black philosopher, composer, and improvising artist Sun Ra. If I wanted to use this quote, this would actually be really good in my essay about Sun Ra to say, what he is. Like, what does he do? This guy who wrote this article gave me everything that I need. Astro-Black philosopher, composer, and improvising artist. So if I were to write this into my essay, I might write, and these are words I would use to introduce the quote, according to Ajay Hebla, comma, okay, so I'm saying who he is. I probably need to say something about, what he, like, why does he have the authority to say something about Sun Ra? An easy way to do that on most articles is to look at the beginning or at the end, and you'll find like where that person works, what is their title, what is their claim to being an expert. So I would write according to Ajay Hebla, comma, and I can find all the other information I need right here. Professor of English in the School of English and Theater Studies at the University of Guelph, comma, Sun Ra was an, quote, I put in a quote mark, and I'm going to use this selection for my quote. Quote, Astro-Black philosopher, comma, composer, comma, and improvising artist, end quote. Then I'm going to give a space, and then I'm going to put parentheses, and in the parentheses, I'm going to put the page number. This is getting into MLA style. I look at the bottom, 99. So in parentheses, 99, close parentheses, and then a period at the end of the sentence. So I've used my words to introduce it by saying who I'm quoting, and then I give the quote, and then I end it with that parenthetical citation that we need to do with MLA. All right, so this is Project Muse. Another database I want you guys to know about is Academic Search Complete. So let's go back to the A's on the databases. Academic Search Complete, popular. This has everything in it. But sometimes because it has everything, it doesn't have some of the more, the deeper subjects that you might need. That's why I start off by showing you Jstor and Project Muse. Now you see here with Academic Search Complete, they give us this tier of search boxes. I have one box, and I can select a field to search, and then I can choose and or not. So I can search for things that I want to see together, or either or things that I don't want to see at all in my search results. Let's start with something simple. I mentioned this as one of my favorite shows. I haven't read the books yet. But let's look for The Expanse. You see I got 1,916. And I can see with this first one, Expanse, a novel narrative serious game for the behavioral assessment of cognitive abilities. Nothing to do whatsoever with science fiction. The proximities of communities to the expanse of big data. Again, they're using expanse in a descriptive way, not what we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is in the and box, I can choose and or not, but I'm going to choose and I'm going to put the name of the author, the pen name of the author anyways, James S. A. Corey, and see what happens. 1,000, almost 2,000 search results down to 5. So now I have a much easier view of things that I can use. Now, something I wanted to point out, like with this very first search result, Great Heavy Sacks of Stuff, James S. A. Corey's Convention Bending Space Opera. You see how it has a link here for Find It at CUNY, right after all the bibliographic information. So here's all the bibliographic information you need for your research log. The Find It at CUNY link means that Academic Search Complete does not have a copy. But you might be able to find a copy in some of the other databases at CUNY. So if I click on Find It at CUNY, it generates a list of possible places that you can find a copy through Academic OneFile, Gale in Context, Newsstand, Business Insights, Lexis Uni. And you can also do interlibrary loan, but that's probably not going to happen since nobody's in the libraries right now due to the coronavirus. This interlibrary loan, just so you know, that's where a librarian finds a print copy or a digital copy and makes it available to you as like a PDF and will email it to you. Very handy, or they may even mail a copy of it to school and you go pick it up at the library. Very handy, but quite impossible with the way things are right now. Now, I've already gone through all these for this particular one, and none of these other databases have a copy of this particular article. And that's something that will happen sometimes. So if you can't find the thing that is showing up in the search results, say, okay, that's fine. I'm going to look at the next one. And so I go back to the list, Tiamat's Wrath from Publishers Weekly. I got all my bibliographic information. I can click on PDF full text. And then I get my article listed here. This is actually just a review of that particular novel, Tiamat's Wrath. But there might be something useful in there, and I can quote from that and use it in my article, in my research essay. Again, make sure you download any of your sources you find so that you don't lose anything. Let's go back to the databases for another one. Right above Academic Search Complete, there's Academic OneFile Gale. Let's click on that one. Okay, this has a simplified search box. There's one box to type things in. So I'm going to type in another science fiction film that I like, Blade Runner. And you can see here that I got, a whole lot of sources. 1,556. I can look at the top here and I can actually see that there's also more sources and magazines I have access to, 8 books, 11,000 in news, images, and also some videos. What I'm going to do is, let's see, what would be one that I want to take a look at? Romantic Roots of Blade Runner. Electric Nature, Reconstructing Wilderness and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. That's the novel by Philip K. Dick that Blade Runner is based on. Let's click on that and see what happens. So the way the Gale Academic OneFile works is many of the articles are going to be available just in text format. Like you can just start reading it as soon as you click on it. But you can also click on this little link here to download. And this is going to download the PDF version. The PDF version, if it's available, I would recommend using that. Because here you can see the actual pages of how that article looked in the printed journal. So you're going to have page numbers that you can work from in your citation. And at the bottom, you can see it has like all the bibliographic information here, volume, number, title of the journal. Here we have the title of the article. We got the author's name, Aaron A. Cloyd. And then I can search through this and see if maybe I can find something specific to Blade Runner that I want to quote from for my work. Oh, one thing I'll mention about that as well, if we scroll to the bottom of this article we're just taking a look at, see it has a Works Cited list. Just like your research essay is going to have a Works Cited list at the end of it of all the things you quote from. So all these things that are here in Works Cited on this article are things that this author has quoted from in their work. And so these sources can be sources that you look for. So like if there's an article here, you might plug in the title of that article into some of the databases and you might be able to use it in your work. So follow down some of these leads if you're having trouble finding sources or if you want to do a deeper dive to find more sources that might be useful to you. All right, so those are some of the main databases I wanted to mention to you guys: Jstor, Project Muse, Academic Search Complete, and Academic OneFile. Now, about eBooks. Now, Jstor and Project Muse will, and I think Gale Academic OneFile, they should all show you some books that are available. But if we go back over to the library's website, you can see over here on the left, there's a link for Find eBooks. Now, for this, what I would recommend is don't look for ebook collections by name, but scroll down. And this time, I do want you to click on Humanities, Communications, Literature, Music. This is just for ebooks. Click on that. And then these are all the different databases that are going to show you ebooks that we have access to online. So the ebooks, are obviously electronic books, books that you can read in a browser, your phone, a computer, etc. And if we take a look, let's see, EBSCO ebook collection. So I'm going to click on the EBSCO ebook collection. So these are all books that I can read online. I don't have to check it out. I'm just going to do a search for science fiction. And the very first thing that I see come up is science fiction by Mark Bould. I've read and reviewed this book for a magazine. This is a very good introduction to science fiction film. And so if you're writing about a science fiction film or television series, you might want to take a look at this ebook because Mark Bould, a scholar from the UK, gives you some good ideas about like how science fiction operates when we're talking about the moving image with film and television. And with this, you can click PDF full text. It just takes a minute for it to load up. And then I can start scrolling. We've got the title with the film Flash Gordon on the front, and I can begin reading the full text. I get information about who Mark Bould is. And just another thing I didn't mention earlier is like whenever you're quoting a scholar, quoting someone from a secondary source, make sure you introduce your reader to who that person is. Like, let us know why we should trust what that person is saying about the quote that you're going to be using in your essay. So in this case, I might say, according to Mark Bould, comma, a reader in film and literature at the University of West of England and co-editor of Science Fiction, Film, and Television. That's a prestigious journal in the field. Then I would go into like, what his quote is. And I would quote, and then at the end I give the parenthetical citation with the page number. Scroll down a little bit more, a little bit introduction. And here I'm getting down to close to the copyright information. So I see the title of the book, science fiction, the name of the author. Here I have the name of the publisher, Routledge. And then on the copyright page, I see the year it was published. So I got all the bibliographic information I need for a book. Title, author, publisher, year. That's all I need. All goes into the MLA format in your Works Cited list. And then remember, if you're quoting something from this book, like if I go down, again, here I'm going into Blade Runner. If I want to quote something that he writes about Blade Runner here, so I quote this sentence, right? I put that in quotation marks. I give a parenthetical citation at the end saying, parentheses, bold, B-O-U-L-D is name, a space, and then the page number. You see right here, 107, close parentheses, period. Okay? And all this is an MLA website that I'll show you in just a minute. Going back over to the databases for, this is subject guide. Let's go back to the library, find eBooks, go to humanities. You can see that there's also Gale Virtual Reference Library, has some good stuff. And we scroll down a little bit more. Project Muse Global Cultural Studies has some good stuff. And also one thing I didn't mention earlier, if you need to define a word, use the Oxford English Dictionary. This is like the preeminent dictionary for the English language. If you're going to be quoting a definition, don't say according to dictionary.com or according to Merriam-Webster. I mean, those are great places for reference, but if we're talking about something authoritative, we want to use the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. You have access to that through CityTech. Otherwise, you have to pay money to access it because it's like a really big-ass dictionary that not only gives you definitions, it also gives you the etymology of words. Etymology of words is the history of the word, how it's used over time. Because any language, if you're not aware of this, changes over time. Obviously, the way we talk today and the words we use today are different than the way people used English several hundred years ago. And the Oxford English Dictionary charts how our language has changed over time, which may be useful if you're going to be talking about words and the way words are used in a science fictional context in your essay. All right, so these are some of the ebook places that you can go. And of course, all these other links you can use as well. But I mean, I'm just trying to give you a highlight of places to get started for your research. You want to do it sooner rather than later. You need to settle on what you're going to be researching, what is the topic of your essay, that's your primary source, and then start looking at secondary sources for quotes that you can use to support and elaborate on in your discussion about the work as being a work of science fiction. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you, and again, I mentioned this in class before, but remember these three key words. Just plug into Google Purdue OWL MLA. I actually go to Google rather than use DuckDuckGo, and we'll Purdue OWL MLA. Very first link at the top, MLA Formatting and Style Guide. That is the resource I want you to use for writing the way that your research essay looks, the way that you use quotes, and the way that you have a works cited entry for each of your quoted sources at the end of the essay. I will tell you later how to copy what you've written in your essay into a post that will go on our Open Lab site, which will still follow the MLA formatting, but if the way that you write it in, say, Microsoft Word or on Google Docs follows MLA, copy and pasting it over into Open Lab will be very easy and quite painless. Now, the main things I want to point out to you here is that on the MLA website, on Purdue's Online Writing Lab, OWL is what it stands for, Online Writing Lab, they give you everything that you need to know about MLA. And the main things that you need to focus on are how to create a works cited list, Okay, that's the list of sources that you're citing, you're quoting from in your essay. And it gives you an overview of some of that basic bibliographic information you need: author, title of source. They say title of container. That would be like a book or a journal, okay? If there are other contributors, other like names, like is it written by more than one person? Is there like a volume number, issue number, who's the publisher, the publication date, okay? And then they give you lots of examples of what these things would look like. So like if we're looking at the book, The Location of Culture by Homi Bhabha, we see here the author's name is given at the beginning, Bhabha, last name first, comma, his first name, Homi, and then his middle initial K. We got the title of the book italicized. The thing about MLA is that we italicize the titles of big things like books, journals, but the titles of small things like the episode of a television show, an article inside a journal, article in a magazine, newspaper, those are put into quotation marks. A song on an album is in quotation marks, but then the album title would be italicized because it's the bigger thing containing the smaller thing. Then you can see we have the publisher's name, Routledge, comma, and the year was published, 1994. So you can use these examples to make yours look like theirs. They give an example of what the title of a source would be. The title of the container, like a book or a series title, Parks and Recreation. Websites, other contributors, different versions of a work, like say the Bible, it's a lot of different versions, different translations. Numbers, such as volume numbers and issue numbers. Who the publisher is, publication date. So this is something you'll need to scan on your own in order to get an idea of what are the main things that will be going into your Works Cited list. Now, there's the in-text citations as well. That's what I called before the parenthetical citation, the thing that you put in parentheses at the end of a quote. And it gives you basic guidelines here of what that would look like. So in this case, they're quoting Wordsworth. Well, Wordsworth, the title of the author, or the name of the author, is actually in the sentence. So you don't need to include that in your parenthetical citation. You only give, after the quote, spontaneous overflow or powerful feelings, quote, then you give a space, open parentheses, then you give the page number it appears on, close parentheses, and then a period. But now if you don't include the name of the author in the sentence, you need to include it in the parenthetical citation. Romantic poetry is characterized by, quote, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, end quote. Then you give a space, then open parentheses, give the author's last name, then a space, then the page number, 263, close parentheses, period. And again, you make yours look like theirs. Easy as that. Don't overcomplicate it. I don't want to see like weird things that students sometimes do, like a comma between the author's name and the page number. MLA doesn't do that. So make sure that you make yours look like the examples here. And if you have questions about these, you can send me like what you've written, and I will write back and say via email, make this change, or it looks right. It's not a big deal, but just make sure that you are making every attempt to make it look the correct way. Don't invent systems and don't rely on what maybe you had a high school teacher tell you at some point in time, this is how MLA works. Because the thing about MLA, just like language, just like words, everything else, it changes over time. So make sure that you're looking at the latest version, which is what the Purdue OWL MLA website gives us. Now, if you want more examples and how to work with different sources, you can see over here on the left, there's MLA Works Cited page basic format, Works Cited page books, periodicals, electronic sources, and other common sources. Everything that we're going to be working on in this research essay is detailed in some form or fashion on these pages. So if you take a look at the in-text citations basics, formatting quotations, and then the Works Cited page stuff here, you'll have everything that you need. You can also take a look at the sample Works Cited page and the MLA sample paper to get a sense of what the overall thing ought to look like. If we take a look at that sample paper here, actually I'm going to download it so I can look at it a little bit bigger. All right, so here's the sample paper, and you can see that you have in the upper left-hand corner a name block. Start with your name, then my name, Professor Jason Ellis. It's for English 2420. The date that you put there should be the date that it's due, okay? Underneath that, centered on the page, you're going to have the title that you create for your essay. And I would recommend a catchy title that is both descriptive and interesting. So don't use a one-word title, because that doesn't tell us anything. But also don't make a real boring title that that is so straightforward that it puts your reader to sleep. Make it something catchy. That's the hook that you use to catch your reader's attention. Then directly underneath that, you begin with an indent, and then you begin your writing. Writing. You can also include headings for different parts of your essay if you want. You don't have to use headings. It's not necessary. We can see that we got a parenthetical citation here. One of these improvements was the development of canals and steamboats, which allowed farmers to, quote, sell what has previously been unsellable, end quote, and resulted in a, quote, substantial increase in a farmer's ability to earn income, end quote. And you see they used Danhoff space page 5, right? This is an example of what your parenthetical citation should look like for your quotes. And if we look at the end of the essay, we're going to see Works Cited. I can find Danhoff right here. And we have Danhoff, comma, Clarence H. We have the title of his book, Change in Agriculture, Harvard University Press, comma, published in 1969, period. So we have Works Cited list. Now, one thing you can see here is that there's also a list of notes. Don't worry about notes for our essay. All I want to see in your essay is your own writing, the quotes that you use, make sure that they're cited properly, and then a Works Cited list at the end of the essay. Okay? You don't have to include notes, either footnotes or endnotes. And when all this is done, basically you're going to copy all this and then paste it in your post over on OpenLab. Look through it, make sure it looks correct, and then you'll publish it. And I'll show you how to do that with some screenshots showing you the steps a little bit later on. All right, so that's doing the research. That gives you access to the Purdue OWL MLA website. I went over the basic guidelines of the project, which is you're making an argument that the subject you select is an example of science fiction, that you're basically trying to prove the argument that the work you select is a work of science fiction. If you got questions about that, please email me. Email me to let me know what your topic is anyway, so that I can get back to you and let you know if I have any advice to help you along, because I've been doing that for other students, but I certainly haven't heard from everybody yet. If you have trouble with some of your research, reach out to the librarians. They're linked from the library website, library.citytech.cuny.edu. You can also ask me questions, and I'll try to help you. But also use the librarians, because they're the resource. I mean, they know the most about the resources they have and can certainly help you if you give them some guidance over what you're working on. So make sure you just don't email them and say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Email them and let them know what you've tried doing, what your topic is, and then what you're trying to find. And they'll be able to help you with that by you giving them some intelligent guidance on what you're working on. So again, everybody be healthy. Take care of those around you. I wish you all the best of luck dealing with what we're dealing with right now, but let's also do the work of learning so that we're not wasting this time and that something good can come out of it, which will be you moving forward with your education. Keep me in the loop if anything comes up as much as you can, and I'll be doing the same. So this is the second kind of lecture for this week, which will be on the research essay to go along with the second part of the golden age of science fiction. So I'll be seeing you guys again soon when we pick up new wave science fiction. Well, actually, our next lecture is going to be on science fiction film of the 1950s. Then after that will be new wave science fiction. Okay, see you then.